Today's the day. Okay guys, today is the day we are leaving for Italy. Today's the day and we are heading to Italy and I cannot believe it.
No, you need to take all this out.
Short moment, English, short. Perfect. I think that's the only extra things that I wanted to put in. Alright, we are on the first flight of our trip, which is Brisbane to Qatar, which is a 14.5-hour flight. It literally did feel that long. I barely slept in this flight, so I was very tired. We eventually finally got to Qatar, had a 3-hour leg over in there, and then we got on our next flight from Qatar to Rome, which was about 5.5, 6 hours, and then we eventually made it to our Airbnb. We got a little bit lost finding it, but we eventually got there and the view was beautiful. I just couldn't believe I was in Rome, and we had dinner that night and I was basically falling asleep at the table, so as soon as we had dinner we were out. Welcome to the Trevi Fountain. Today we had tickets booked for the Colosseum at 8:30 a.m. so we got up bright and early and we actually walked from our Airbnb to the Colosseum, which is about 20 minutes away, and along the way we stopped in at the Trevi Fountain. We were so incredibly lucky because we got there quite early and not many people were there. I just had like the best time walking around the streets, seeing what a typical street looks like in Italy and just like all the culture and how old everything was, but still like equally as beautiful. And then of course we saw the Colosseum and oh my gosh, this was such a pinch me moment. I just couldn't believe that I was standing in the Colosseum, and it was such a moment for John as well because this is something that he has always wanted to see. We were super lucky with the weather. When we were getting towards the end of our like look around the Colosseum, it did start to rain. It's giving rain chic. We then walked from the Colosseum to see the Pantheon, and we stopped in at a beautiful cathedral, and then along the way as well we also stopped for street food, of course. Uncini Parmigiana, I think. That's really good.
That's awesome.
That afternoon, we had an Airbnb experience booked to cook with nonnas, and I was so excited. We had to get to a little town called Palombara Sabina, and that little town is beautiful just to see all on its own. Our tour guide during the day, she met us there, took us around the town, showed us the castle, just giving us the backstory of what was happening around in the war days as well. We then got to see the beautiful nonna. She invited us to her home and we then got to cook some pasta.
Because they added not only the olive with the nonna's olives.
Wow.
Sotto sopra.
Vai, bravissimi, così piano piano, ok. Gentilmente.
Hold.
Ok, quando che lo sentiamo che è bello duro,
When you feel that it's a little bit tougher and it's a bit more homogeneous, so you can make it a little
andiamo con
better.
il palmo della mano e facciamo così.
You can use
A rotola, senza spingere.
without pressure more manuality. Perfect.
Ecco perché.
Buonanotte
Buonanotte Fiorellino, buonanotte.
then, but the real technique comes in a bit, okay? So, indeed, when the grandmas were young,
vai, a
it was a
rotola.
part of the dowries of a woman.
Vai,
was married,
bravissimo,
okay?
tu scegli su chef.
No, I think you're a real chef.
Vai su chef.
Chef, sorry.
Che significa su chef? Che ne faccio?
Su chef è l'aiutante del cuoco,
Ah,
il secondo in
ok,
comando.
vai.
Hold it and slap it open.
Là.
Yeah.
Vai, ok. Madonna che brava,
Amazing.
Ma quando da casa fai la pasta,
And now when you go back home, you have to make the pasta.
Vai, bravissima!
So this way they're a bit separated from each other, because if you put them one on top of the other, they stick together, and then they stick together also in the pot. This way you can see when you fry. Adesso di sì, scusa. Non sono scritto
Vai,
Now I'll do the man.
vai,
Watch you close.
vai. Ok, vai, metti questa. Vai. Oh. Shake, 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 shake,
Oh.
shake, shake, vai. Bisogna shakerare, a me ne scenderò giù, eh.
You have to shake it, otherwise it's full.
The next day we were in search of some maritozzi, so we went to a local bakery. Well, it wasn't quite local to us. I actually walked 20 minutes to get to this bakery, and it was called Regoli, and it was recommended on TikTok. It was delicious, but I probably wouldn't walk that far again because there was a lot of maritozzi around, and I'm sure one close to us would have been amazing also. I, of course, dropped coffee on myself, so I had to go home and change outfits. Along the way, we stopped for some ice cream, which was delicious. This was my first gelato because every other day had been freezing up until that point. The afternoon we had a guided tour around the Vatican museums, and I'm so glad that we did a guided tour because I would have had no idea what I was looking at. Of course, everything is absolutely beautiful just to look at it on its own, but to really understand each painting and what they meant, it was really cool just to experience firsthand. It is definitely something that you need to do. We also stopped in the Sistine Chapel, but we weren't able to take photos in there, so I couldn't grab that for you. And then that afternoon we went to St. Peter's Basilica to have a little look around, and we just kind of finished our day, and tomorrow we are headed to Treviso. So today we are traveling from Rome to Treviso, and we were kind of stressed about it because we had seen that there was a massive train strike today, and we've been asking all of the locals, not all of them, just some that we had tours with, and we just asked, what does that mean? Will our train go ahead? Basically, it meant that if the driver wanted to show up on the day, he will, and it will go ahead. If he doesn't turn up for work, then your train is cancelled. So it was truly up in the air of when you get there. So if you're ever in this situation, I recommend just going to the train station, seeing what happens, and go from there. We were super lucky that our fast train was going ahead from Rome to Venice, so that one was swift because that was our longest one, and if that had not gone to plan, I honestly don't know what we would have done. When we got to Venice though, our train from Venice to Treviso was cancelled, and this was like probably around, I don't know, I want to say like $6 for the train. So it was kind of like, well, it's not the biggest loss, and we just need to figure out a way to get to Treviso. So it was actually a half an hour drive, and I just said to my mum, because we were traveling with my family, we said, all right, that's it. Like, let's just get a taxi. The cost is what the cost is, and let's just go. So we used the taxi app, got a taxi, found out what the costs were sort of upfront, and I think it was around like 60 to 70 euro. And at that point I was like, let's just get to Treviso, so we're here. So we got our taxi and we got to Treviso. So that was sort of our travel story, and we were actually super lucky because I know a lot of people that get super stuck in train strikes. So we were super, super lucky. day we headed out to Venice. We caught a train from Treviso to Venice, and I just found Venice a little bit busy. Looking back at this footage, I'm like, wow, it is actually stunning from the little grabs that I got. But when I was there, I felt very overwhelmed just by the amount of people that were there, understandably. We had an awesome time looking around. We checked out the Rialto Bridge, which had stunning views. It was just so interesting to see how the city sort of operates with it all being on water. We then booked a Airbnb experience of a tasting tour around Venice, and this was the highlight of our day. We had an awesome guide that was local who took us around to all of his favorites, restaurants, cafes, and showed us around. We tried all these different Venetian foods, which was really cool to experience, including cicchetti, which I loved, and it was probably my favorite of the day. We then got on a gondola, but this was the gondola that was actually only €2, and it took us from one side of the street to the other side of the street. The other gondolas, which they do go for half an hour to 45 minutes, were around that €110 mark. So we just wanted the experience. We jumped on, we jumped off, and like I said, €2, which was incredible. We headed out to St. Mark's Square, and then the closer we got to the cathedral, obviously the busier and busier that it got. So we left in the late afternoon and headed back to Treviso. Doing some laundry. It's already that time. It's, I don't know what the date is. 7th? These stairs will be the death of us. So today we're traveling from Treviso to Bellagio. So we had to get from Treviso to Milan, Milan to Verona, and then Verona to Bellagio. It was quite the feat, but we managed to get there. We had 2 big luggages and we were fine, but obviously there's stairs and things to take into account. So just be wary of that when you're doing the massive travel days. As soon as I saw these mountains, I was like, oh my actual God, where are we? I've never seen anything like this. And my mind was like that the whole time we were here. I genuinely wish we had way more time in Bellagio, but we only had a couple of days, so we tried to make the most of it. But we will definitely be coming back, and if you are going, try and extend the trip if you're still in planning stages. We got to our Airbnb after lots of stairs. We eventually found it. The owner was incredible to talk to. She had a lot of good suggestions of where to go, what to check out. I'll leave the Airbnb in the description. And we just spent the whole time walking around Bellagio, looking at all the things and just taking in the views and taking it slow for a couple of days. So I hope you enjoy this montage footage. Guys, these stairs will be the death of us. It is rough out here, but not equally, a lot more beautiful than I should complain about, but still, these freaking stairs. So today we're making our way to Bologna. So we have to go from Bellagio to Verona on the ferry, Verona to Milan on a train, and then Milan to Bologna on a train. We eventually got there, and our very first stop was the Ferrari Museum. We got a train from Bologna to Modena, and that was really easy. We got on the shuttle. Their shuttle system for Ferrari is really, really weird with the times. So just double check that, because we actually missed out on one whole museum because we couldn't make the times. We went in the afternoon, and that's probably why. So it's actually most likely a full day thing. It was really cool to see the museum, all the different cars. It kind of took us through sports cars and just like the evolution of those. And then of course we had seen the F1 cars as well in its own little area with all the trophies and the drivers and all that. And John, as you guys saw just before, he had a simulation book, which was really cool. All the boys did that and they really enjoyed it, and I'm glad they just did the simulation because they all crashed. So if they were in a real Ferrari, that would have been a severe issue, but we had a blast there. And then that night we just headed down to the Bologna main square. I didn't get a lot of time in Bologna because we chose Como over Bologna for that little bit, but we had a beautiful dinner that night, and we actually met up with Franco, who was our exchange student years and years ago, which was so much fun. The next day we had a tour booked, which was the best tour of our trip probably, and it took us through the Parmigiano Reggiano factory, all the cheese, seeing how it was made. This whole tour was so educational, and we learnt so much about all the different places that we went to. You'll see all the different factories that we went, but this was super cool to see how the cheese was made. It just is such a long process and a tedious process, and we actually have no idea, and it was really cool to learn how they go about it. This is the cheese rising out of the salt water, which was really cool. And then we were just absolutely in cheese heaven with this wall of cheeses. I mean, it's giving unreal scenes, and it was just actually crazy. And then we went out and seen the ricotta being made, which was delicious. They gave us a little taste test of this, and it was so freaking good. So this cheese that you see here now, it actually gets cut in half, and that makes 2 cheese wheels. But like, how cool is that? How that makes that? Like, seriously. Next up was the balsamic vinegar factory, and this was actually probably the highlight of the day. It's a family run factory, and this whole tour, by the way, was a family organization, so it was really cool because like the brother was the driver, and then the other brother was the like host of the day. This balsamic vinegar was a family run business, and it has traditions on traditions. Like the different barrels were named after different children, and they just like look after everything so well. This one that you're seeing now was actually like 157 years old, and we got to taste test all the different balsamic vinegars. There's a whole different range of them. We stepped out on the farm and just embraced the sun, because this was actually the first day that we had hot weather, because every other day had been cold pretty much. Next up we went to the prosciutto factory, and this was, really interesting. The smell was potent, but like to be expected, obviously. But it was really cool, again, to see how they make it. They make like a paste for the prosciutto, and how the factory runs for the prosciutto to get out and get sold as well. That night That day we had a long lunch, and I literally mean long. Like, I thought we were finished, and they were like, okay, now we're on to the pastas. And there was like 3 pastas, and then there was a pizza, and then there was dessert, and it was just crazy. But the vibes were so high. The family like had a little dance at the end. This was the host with his mom, and they were just dancing it out, and everyone was just having an absolute blast. It was an incredible day all around, and I wish I could do it all over again. Welcome to Florence, everyone. We made our way from Bologna to Florence this morning on a fast train, and we headed straight for the Galleria dell'Accademia, of course, to see the David statue from Michelangelo. It was so cool to see in real life. It was massive. It was way bigger than I thought it was. I feel like pictures and videos are so deceiving to what it is in the real life. I was completely blown away by like the veins and everything on the statue. Like, how was that even real? The entire gallery was so cool, so interesting to see. After that, we headed to El Antico Vinile, which is the famous sandwich shop. It is a massive tourist spot, and it was a little bit crowded, a little bit hectic, but it was a yummy sandwich overall, but not the best thing I've ever eaten in my life. We spent the rest of the time walking around the streets in Florence, just seeing what's around our Airbnb, and then, of course, we headed off to see the famous Duomo in the square, and wow, by far, this was probably the nicest cathedral I had seen on the outside. There are recommendations not really to go inside because the inside isn't as great as the outside, so just keep that in mind when you're planning, but the outside was absolutely beautiful. There's an awesome gelato spot just next to it called Eduardo that was recommended to us, and it was the perfect gelato, a perfect afternoon, and then we headed out for dinner. We also had a really amazing busker just outside our Airbnb, and he was incredible. The next day we headed off to a breakfast spot. I was craving just a general breakfast, not just a cappuccino and a croissant. It was at Le Meningere, and it was delicious. It was a little bit pricier for breakfast, but we were happy to spend it because, yeah, as I said, we were craving like eggs and avocado and also like a cappuccino, mocha. That's sort of where I was at. We kept walking around, and we ended up at the Medici Museum, which actually was one of the coolest things that I loved seeing in Florence. I definitely recommend going here. It was very interesting, like actually the history behind the Medici family, and just like, I can't believe that this was someone's like house. Like, people lived in this, and it was just mind-blowing. This room in particular was insane. Like, how did someone paint that on the ceiling? Like, the more and more you look at it, the more detail. Like, no one has the patience for that these days, but it was absolutely incredible. We made our way to the Ponte Vecchio, of course, to see the famous history behind it. What an incredible thing to see and just appreciate. We had amazing views on the Ponte Vecchio of the other bridges, and then we headed off to the Bobbly Gardens. This is something that we just sort of stumbled across and weren't really planning on, but if you are planning to do this, I recommend wearing very good walking shoes and comfortable clothing, because it's a massive walk to get up and down the stairs, up and down the little corridors. It's humongous, and again, I was just blown away that this is someone's, like, back in the day, this was someone's gardens. Like, goals. We had so many viewpoints from the gardens. We just spent the time walking around as slowly, because obviously it was a lot of work, but we just appreciated it and took in all of the views as well. I had a little stumble, and I wish John got it on camera, but he just got the very end of it. It was hilarious on the little little cobblestones, which is so funny. We then walked our way to the famous photo booth that was on TikTok, got our photos, and headed back to our Airbnb. So our Airbnb was right next to the Santa Maria Novella Cathedral, which was a perfect location. So I'll link that Airbnb below for you guys. We then went to the train station because finally my sister is joining us on the rest of our Italy trip. I'm so excited that she's now here. We went out for dinner that night, had the Florentine steak, of course, because we were in Florence, and we had a little cute lemon dinner. This one was called Toscana Agricola, and it was delicious. I had the cacio e pepe, and it was A+. The next day was one of my favorite days, just because we saw so many different cities, but we booked a tour and we went to 3 different spots. So first one was Siena, second San Gimignano, and the third was Pisa. I loved Siena. It was such a nice little town, and I'd probably stay there if I went back because it was really cute. I loved all the history behind it. We had a guided tour across that who told us the history, and then we went to the famous Siena Cathedral, and this one on the inside, mind blowing. I keep saying it over and over, but it was just like, I just can't believe that this was like, you know, handmade, and it took years and years and years, and it's just incredible to see all the like fine work that went into it. So enjoy these little captured moments that I took. We were back on the bus and we were headed now to the Chianti winery. So we had a little lunch planned at the Chianti wines, which was so exciting because my sister really wanted to check out the winery, and the views were amazing. It was like truly in a movie, and I really felt like we were in Tuscany. Like we were, but it just was one of those moments and you're like, oh my God, this is what I've been seeing in my dreams, basically. We sat down with all the rest of the people that were on the tour with us, and we had a nice long lunch. We had some pastas, some antipasti, wine, of course, which I couldn't really get around, but I could appreciate where we were and how much time and effort it would have gone into making those wines. I spent the time walking around the little farm, having a little look around before we headed back onto the bus, and this time we were headed to San Gimignano, which I loved as well. It was a very small town, and this was the best gelato we had on the entire trip. So if you're looking for the best gelato, head to San Gimignano to Gelateria Dondoli, and that is the one that you want to try. We then headed off to Pisa. We had a couple hours in Pisa. It was a nice area. I was unsure about it, hearing about Pisa, but we enjoyed our time there for the time that we were there, got our pictures, and headed back home to Florence. The next day we went off to the Mercato Centrale, which is like a food market there. It was like upstairs a lot of restaurants, and downstairs was all the food and vegetables that people could buy. There was like fish, all sorts. So if you're looking to pick up your own little things, I definitely recommend the Mercato Centrale. We then walked to the famous wine window, got some wine for my sister, and it was just really cool. Again, history. Everything is so historical in Italy. We then went to the Piazzale Michelangelo, which was on the other side of Florence, so where we were from, but the views make it 100% worth it, and we spent the whole afternoon there just really taking it in.
Have a drink.
We went to the restaurant that was there as well. So there's like literally one restaurant, you won't miss it. We just had some antipasti because I think for dinner we had to book, but they let us in to have a quick snack and drink. And then we waited for the sunset. Unfortunately, the clouds weren't having the best day, so it covered a little bit, but we still got a little bit of sun, but then we just went back home. The next day we headed off to Lucca, which again I absolutely loved, and we had an Airbnb experience booked, which was another cooking class, and this was the best food that we had our entire trip. It was delicious. Everything, all the ingredients were organic, homemade. Everyone's getting around it. It was such an intimate setting as well, so everyone was just getting to know each other, all the different like countries that everyone was from, and we were just making incredible food on an incredible farm. We were making eggplant parmigiana, we made a chicken dish, pasta, bruschetta, panna cotta, tiramisu, so you know, one's dream. One thing to keep in mind about Lucca as well is that the taxis are very, very, very limited. We actually, after the cooking class, waited an hour for a taxi to come and pick us up, but the lady was lovely and she let us walk around and taste some of her cherries that she had on her cherry trees, which was great. We eventually got picked up and it was time to go on Vespers. We had a accident on the Vespa. We ended up hitting a curb and fully carking it onto the road. It was fine. Like, I'm glad that this was the only incident. I'd rather just a quick couple of scratches than a hospital trip. It did ended up costing us €300 in damages, which wasn't ideal, but again, I would rather that any day over being in hospital. So that was our time, and it was very traumatizing in the moment, but it's just a funny experience to look back on. And this curb here was literally where it happened. Hit the curb, knocked over, cried, but it was all good. Stay tuned for my next stop, which is Sorrento. Morning, we caught a train from Florence to Naples, and then we got a private transfer from Naples to Sorrento, and we went through Good Heart limos, and we did that for all of our private transfers, and I really, really recommend them. We stopped in at Pompeii, and this was actually incredible, like mind-blowing, and I can't even process how this even happened. Like, they're still digging it to this day. Like, our guided tour took us to places that they were literally still digging and finding all these different like wall art and things like that, and it was just crazy to see how they lived life back then. It was really, really interesting. And then we went back into the car and we headed straight to Sorrento, and oh my god, I can't even tell you, when I saw the water I just felt immediately at home. After not seeing water for so long, it was really refreshing just to see water. Especially living in Australia, I was just like, oh, this is just like a little reminder of home, and it felt really nice. We spent the rest of the day exploring around Sorrento. We had the most beautiful Airbnb in a perfect location that I'll link for you guys down below, and we just spent the afternoon looking around, going up and down, looking at the marina, and also just like the main streets of Sorrento as well. Day wasn't the best weather, so we just spent the day relaxing and hopping from restaurant to restaurant. We ran into our Australian friends there, so we had a big lunch together while the rain was just pouring down, and then we headed to dinner at Il Pozzo, and this was really delicious. I highly recommend this restaurant in Sorrento. It was one of our favorites during the trip. The following day we had booked a boat tour, and it was kind of touch and go with the weather. There was moments of sun and then moments of cloudy best, but we were able to go out onto the water. We booked this through Airbnb Experiences, and I will link that down for you guys below as well. Our driver was incredible. We had the best time. We got to swim. We went to all the grottos, red grotto, white grotto, blue grotto, and he took us through the Capri and then back to Sorrento. So enjoy these little montages. After our boat trip, we headed straight back to Sorrento to get our favorite gelato from Rocky. I think it's Rocky or Raki, and it's absolutely delicious, and I pretty much went there every single day. And then the following day, we went to Positano, so we got a private transfer again with Goodheart Limos to take us to Positano. It was just the fastest, quickest way for us to get there, and it ended up actually being cheaper between the 6 of us to divide than getting on the ferry. So we did it that way. We spent the day in Positano. It was great, and then we headed back home to Sorrento for a beautiful final dinner all together. It was great. It was in like a lemon tree farm restaurant, and you would have dinner amongst the lemons, and then you could actually walk into their like lemon garden where they had so many lemons, and it was actually beautiful. And then we woke up on our last day and we headed to Fiumicino because we decided to stay there a couple of nights before our flight back home. It's just closer to the airport and it was super, super convenient. So we had our final dinners there and then we headed back home.